Welcome to The Power of Now What, a podcast on overcoming the various challenges and problems that one encounters when on the spiritual path, when on a spiritual journey, when engaged in a practice or discipline such as meditation, and even post awakening and post the enlightenment experience itself. This is episode 8 on the subject of emotional pain, specifically the relationship of emotional pain to the spiritual path and the relationship of emotional pain to meditation. I mean, after all, isn't the spiritual path and meditation supposed to get rid of this emotional pain? Isn't it supposed to free us from all of this? Isn't this the promise of where all this is leading to, the enlightenment and the awakening? Will it free me from this emotional pain? It's incredibly annoying and disrupting when you have found presence. You're fully present, immersed in the universal consciousness, and you feel liberated and free, but then this little niggling shadow just starts to creep up. It's this deep emotional pain that just rears its head again. Perhaps it's guilt, regret, shame, anger, resentment, hatred, anxiety, just some very negative emotional state that rises up whilst you are in the present state. You're in the awakened Satori state, and it's often the negative emotion that pulls you back, drags you back into the egoic state, identified as the individual ego, identified as the person again. And so naturally, this is a common question that comes up to many spiritual teachers and in many spiritual circles about, because ultimately, when we're seeking full enlightenment and awakening, it's the permanence of this state we want to get. It's not a state, by the way, but that it's difficult to talk about. But we want to be established, firmly and permanently established in that state of peace, that state of bliss. We want to be permanently there. So when this emotional pain continues to rise up, even post awakening, and don't doubt your awakening either, you'll know it. If you've had the experience, you'll know about it. And so it's kind of confusing when you felt your ego dropping away and yet the emotional pain often remains. So a question came in about emotional pain and how to deal with it, because it's incredibly distracting from staying present. It's very difficult to stay present when these persistent, painful states keep rearing their ugly head. And this causes a lot of doubt on the spiritual path, because you find presence, you find peace, you begin to change, your whole life begins to change, your consciousness is elevating. But because this emotional pain keeps rising up, you start to think, oh, maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe I'm getting it wrong. Maybe I'm bungling this whole endeavor. You're not. You're doing just fine. Just fine. It's a part of the process. And ultimately, as we'll see, I'll discuss all of this, but as you'll see, the pain is not there to distract you. The pain is there to help you. Ultimately, everything is there to help you awaken. This is a late stage intuition that you'll have. The entire world is your guru. The universe is your guru. The ups, the downs, the lefts, the right, the pain, the sorrow, the despair, the joy, all of it is one massive clue into the nature of reality. And even the pain, yes, even the emotional pain will help you to fully awaken. I'm going to speak a little about emotional pain and the kind of conventional response to emotional pain. What happens then when we get into the spiritual path, and what are some of the approaches and practices that we can take in relationship to our emotional pain, and some of the problems that this presents later in sort of later stage post-awakening, post-enlightenment, and eventually some sort of a solution to all of this, if such a thing exists. I'm going to preface everything with this quote that I read. And when I read this quote, it my jaw fell open. I can't believe I'd never come across it before, and it highlighted to me something that I'd been missing on my entire journey from the early days when I approached my emotional pain and my mental health issues from a very clinical perspective, very biological, very scientific perspective, all the way through into my spiritual journey, my meditation practice. I'd never come across this quote, and it highlighted to me something that I'd been missing, and it was a final piece of the puzzle that just slotted into place when I read it. It hit me like a ton of bricks, and the quote goes, "Do not mistake the absence of pain for health." Whew. I mean, it gives me goosebumps even now. Do not mistake the absence of pain for health. It's so true, and yet it's so easily missed. I mean, physically speaking, if an area in your body had gone completely numb, you can't feel anything, that would be a cause for massive concern. Like, a doctor would be very concerned about that if you went in and said, "Hey, it's all right, doc. I can't feel anything at all." The doctor would probably say, "When you say you can't feel anything, like it, so numbness, just being numb is not necessarily a healthy state. Naturally, pain is usually an indicator that something is wrong, but the absence of pain doesn't necessarily indicate that things are going right. Numbness in itself can be a sign of a problem. So if this emotional pain is rising, it's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're, and conversely, just because you're not feeling any pain, that doesn't mean you're in a state of health. Because what we're after, really, it's not just the absence of pain that we want. We want to feel a state of joy. That's what we'd never lose sight of that. We're trying to establish ourselves in joy, love, peace, and happiness. And that is not numbness. That is not an absence of all feeling. I'm getting off track already, but as we're here, sometimes the terminology is quite difficult, particularly when things have been mistranslated from the Eastern languages into Western languages, because peace is sometimes peace and bliss is sometimes translated into things like emptiness and void. And emptiness and void have kind of a negative connotation, and sometimes it leads to a misconception that what we're trying to get towards in enlightenment is a blank state, a state of nothing, of void. Now, emptiness and void as a feeling is actually quite an attractive prospect if you're in deep emotional pain. If you're really in despair and suffering and depression, actually, yeah, I wouldn't mind a little bit of emptiness. I wouldn't mind a little bit of void. But actually, it is worth truly understanding that we're not after a numb state or a void state. What we're looking for is joy and love and peace. And that's not numbness, that's an aliveness. We're looking for the fullness of health. Health comes from an old Greek word that means whole. Health, health. It's where we get the word, and that word means whole. And that's where we get the word health. We're looking for a state of wholeness. And that includes, occasionally, some pain. Now, I want to speak a little about my early experiences with pain. Sorrow found me when I was young. Sorrow waited. Sorrow won. Sorrow, they've put me on the pills. It's in my honey. It's in my milk. Don't leave my hyper heart alone. On the water. Cover me in rag and bone sympathy. because I don't want to get over you. That is the lyrics from a song by The National called Sorrow. And it's one of my all-time favorite songs, and it really does hit home. Sorrow found me when I was young. I'm like, yep, that's me. Sorrow waited. Sorrow won. Yep, it certainly did. Sorrow, they've put me on the pills. Yep, they did that too. It's in my honey. It's in my milk. That's a genius line right there, because I don't know if you've ever had the experience as well of, even when you're feeling happiness and joy, there's this shadow that's always there, because you just know, even when you're happy, you know that that happiness is going to give way into a sadness. And you, it's it's often easy to feel the temporary nature of happiness when we're happy. But when we're sad, we feel like it's going to go on forever. It's quite a bind, quite a pickle. Don't leave my hyper heart alone on the water. Cover me in rag and bone sympathy, because I don't want to get over you. Now, when I first heard it, and for many years, I thought that that last line there, because I don't want to get over you, is that he's referring to a breakup, is that he's referring to somebody that he's lost. He could be grieving, and that's why he's feeling this sorrow, because he doesn't want to get over this person that he's lost. But later I realized, oh, he's speaking directly to sorrow itself, because I don't want to get over you. And that just deepens the meaning for me, because I don't want to get over sorrow. And there's a curious, it's difficult to talk about, this is nuanced, but there is a curiously addictive quality to sadness that I found when I was young. And this is what he means when he says sorrow waited, sorrow won. Because when I was young, and I I felt a lot of this sadness, but I tell you, there were times I really enjoyed being sad. And is some people aren't going to get that, but I think there are a lot of people out there who know what I mean when I say there are times, if you've ever had that experience of listening to some sad music, take yourself off somewhere and just experience the sadness for a while. There's a strangely addictive quality to that. As Edgar Allan Poe put it absolutely beautifully in one of his poems, he said, "By strange alchemy of brain, his pleasures always turned to pain, his naivety to wild desire, his wit to love, his wine to fire." And so, being young and dipped in folly, I fell in love with melancholy. And that it's that I fell in love with melancholy, and in a way, that was kind of like me when I was younger. That I noticed this curious. I have this like intensity of emotion. Everything I feel emotions quite intensely. I think, and sadness was no different. But I just remember this curious wistfulness feeling, this feeling of solitude. It wasn't necessarily alienation. I just felt solitude, which veered into loneliness. And there's this sadness that kind of pervaded. My favorite thing to do when I was like 16, I would put my headphones in, and I'd get on my moped, and I'd go whizzing around the village. And we lived near this huge reservoir. And sometimes I would just take my moped out and ride alongside this reservoir as the sun was setting and the sky was going into its deep pinks and purples, and the stars were winking into existence above me. And I would have my headphones in, and I'd be listening to REM, and I'd be listening to Everybody Hurts and Losing My Religion. And I tell you, I didn't realize it at the time. At the time, I'd have probably said, "Oh, I feel a bit depressed," but I didn't. At the time, I didn't realize just how much of a spiritual experience I was having at that time. And really, looking back, it was kind of nice. It was kind of blissful in a strange roundabout sort of way, because there's a dignity to it, particularly when you're listening to certain music or you're engaged in an activity where you have the space to enjoy that sadness. Before you realized that pain is a problem, it's not really an issue. It's a lot of it, especially when it comes to the spiritual path. It's perspective. It's the perspective that we take on things. When you get older, you this sadness and the sorrow starts getting in the way of your life. It affects your relationships, it affects your job, it affects all of your responsibilities, and it's annoying. It gets too much. As they say in the song Sorrow by the National, sorrow waited, sorrow won. So sorrow found me when I was young, and yet it got its claws in then. It waited and then it won. Because later on down the line, I realized my mistake, and falling in love with melancholy bit me in the ass. Because I ended up very depressed and very anxious. Because this sadness and this depression, and I also suffered a great deal of anxiety since I was very, very, very young, which occasionally was total existential terror. I'm sure many people listening to this will know the experience of just that horror, the sinking feeling in your stomach, the heart racing, the total dysphoria, that existential terror that occasionally just rose up and then subsided into this constant background anxiety. And sadly, I remember the first time I took a drink of alcohol, that first can. I was about 17. And I thought, oh dear, I'm in trouble. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. Even from that first can, I knew this was going to be a problem for me, because it was too good at eradicating the pain, the anxiety, and the depression. It was too good. It worked too well. For the first time in my life, I felt normal. And there's a curious alcohol is a depressant. It's a chemical nervous system depressant. It actually makes you more depressed. But for some reason, it adds this okayness to the depression. It adds this feeling. I almost felt dignified, and I created this narrative in my head of like a troubled poet, like one of in my head I was Edgar Allan Poe. In my head I was Charles Bukowski. Like, oh, I'm just this troubled guy who drinks too much to ease the pain. Sorrow, the sorrow found me when I was young, like that sort of story, this narrative. And that was my initial experiences of emotional pain, and naturally that turned into 10 years of alcoholism that nearly killed me, severe anxiety and depression that also nearly killed me, and eventually coming to a a huge breakdown that then led to my recovery. And I want to speak here on the conventional methods that we try to overcome this sort of emotional pain, before going into a little bit more of what the spiritual path can do for us and what meditation can do for us. Because I started to set about going, right, okay, I'm done with this. I'm not in love with melancholy anymore. I need to break up with melancholy. I need to divorce melancholy. I need to go my separate ways from sorrow, because it's done me, and I'm going to admit defeat and say, you know what? Yes, sorrow has won, and I need out, because this doesn't work. And I set about earnestly trying to fix the emotional pain in my head. And so I did all of the conventional methods. I got exercise. I stopped drinking alcohol. I saw the doctors. I took the pills for a while. I had CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. And then I had more conventional therapy and counseling, in which I can look at my childhood and start going through all of that. And I began meditation at that time as well. And hey presto, it works. It really does. And I cannot overstate the importance of doing all of the conventional things in order to live a happier life. I believe there's a bit of a spiritual trap that happens where people go, oh, okay, I can just jump into the spiritual thing now. And now I don't need to do the exercise. I don't need to see a counselor. I don't need to take the medication. I don't need. And I can, although I can understand that, I would recommend, and I would always recommend it, do the basic stuff, do the conventional stuff. It looks harder, but actually it becomes much, much easier. And one of the best things that you can do for your mental health is just go for a run, go for a walk, and do the basics. See that you have to tick all of those boxes to make sure that you're looking after your body and mind. After all, we still have a physical body and mind here, whatever that means, but there's clearly something here, and there's clearly methods, conventional methods, that will help. I mean, I tell you, the amount of times that I've thought, oh no, I'm having a massive mental health episode. I feel my anxiety rising up. Maybe is this the depression coming back? Oh no, what's going to happen? I feel like I'm about to go through a dark night of the soul, and I'm under all these demonic attacks from spiritual beings. And then I eat some lunch, and I go, oh, I feel a lot better now. And I realize I was just hungry. That's all it was. I wasn't, it was far more basic than what my ego was trying to say it was. And sometimes just do the basics. That's some of my best advice for emotional pain, is actually just run through the checklist. Have you slept well? Have you eaten enough? Have you drank enough water? Have you, like, call a friend, message a friend, like, go for a walk, go for a run? Have you done all of those things? Because the amount of times that you might feel like the emotional pain is unbearable, when actually there's a much more mundane and conventional solution to the pain, and you don't have to like do all of the spiritual fireworks. I mean, it's almost like overkill. Don't bring a nuclear bomb to a knife fight. You've had a bad day at work, and oh god, you'll never believe this email that Sarah sent to me. She was really rude, and she didn't even put kind regards at the end. She just wrote regards, and now I'm in a real pickle. I'm in a real state about this. And right, I'm going to get into my meditation and call in. I summon Archangel Michael to eradicate my enemies. You don't need to go that far to it. It's often our emotional pain is actually caused by something far more mundane. So there's all of these conventional methods that I tried, and actually many of them worked. Many of them worked and went a very long way to helping me to stabilize and helping me to have a more functioning, normal ish brain and a healthy, stable, functioning, solvent body. So that's all good. And in the meditation as well, then that's what kind of not pushed me, the meditation got me onto a spiritual path and looking into some more spiritual matters. Because although I became a lot healthier in my body and mind, much more stable, much more functional, much healthier, I was still aware that this existential horror, this sorrow, was still there somewhere, was lurking just beneath the surface on the well of grief. And no matter how much I did, I tried to No matter how much I exercised, no matter how many friends I had, no matter how good my romantic relationship was, it was always there. It waits around the corner. And no matter how many push ups I do, my shadow is in the car park doing twice as many. And that's when you start to you it one of the functions of emotional pain is that it triggers a deeper looking, because I don't know if it's I don't know if it's just me. I'm sure there's many people like it. Maybe you can relate listening to this now. But I don't like accepting things too early, because acceptance is very powerful, but I believe a lot of people use acceptance as an excuse for laziness, because they have issues, they have problems that need to be fixed, but they say, "Oh, I just accept it because there's nothing I can do about it." You hear this a lot with, like, especially in addiction and fitness and things. Like, "Oh, well, that's just how I am. I can't change." Yes, you can. You can change. And so, I mean, partly when I realized how much I could change, I never thought I'd be able to stop drinking alcohol. When I found something that actually worked and I was like, huh, that's crazy. I actually managed to stop. And then I was obese and I got down to a healthy weight. I was like, huh, so if I can change that, what else could I change? And so this background shadow that was following me around, some people might say, well, that just is what it is. You're going to have to accept it. I'm like, I don't know about that. No, I don't know. That's not what I'm here for. That's not the promise of life. That's not what life is. I'm not going to have this shadow continually following me around. So I got to looking at that. I want to go to the deepest layer. I want to go all the way to the bottom, as Charles Bukowski puts it. Go all the way. And that's what I wanted to do, is get all the way down to the bottom. And the spiritual path, as I began to do more reading, meditating, and researching, it has some answers and it has some solutions. And that's what I'm going to get to now. Before I talk about the spiritual path in a little bit more depth and talk about the Tantric and Vedantic approaches right here, just a little reminder to hit the old like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Really sorry to do that, but trying to grow the channel here. And, it helps me out massively just to whack the old like and subscribe. Cheers. So, in meditation, here's what happens. I found something that worked. That worked. I had some experiences when I was doing some of the very deep meditations relating to self-inquiry. So, where the old identity fell away because I pulled my attention back to the source of attention, withdrew attention from the ego, from temporary, finite, separate things, withdraw my attention from the entire story, including the whole story about sorrow finding me when I was young and falling in love with melancholy. I pulled my attention away from all of that, pulled my attention away from the entire life situation I had, and instead placed attention on attention itself, finding, huh, that's weird. The consciousness itself, the infinite universal consciousness, has never suffered. Not once. It has never felt sorrow. It has never felt anxiety. It's pure awareness. It was aware that this individual ego called Corin Bryant was suffering, but it itself wasn't suffering. And that it is me, because that is my awareness. I am the awareness. So, in understanding that, there was this massive shift. Now, it's important to note there is a crucial distinction when you're changing your perspective, and this is a powerful spiritual practice in itself that you can try. You can stop saying, I am in pain, and start saying, there is pain. This in itself is huge. And there was a massive shift when I could say, there is sorrow, there is anxiety, there is depression. Within the body mind that I am particularly aware of, those things exist. But I am not those things. I am the infinite, pure consciousness that is aware of those things. That understanding did it. It worked. It worked. And this is what happens in the spiritual path. All of a sudden you go, I can't believe it. I'm out. I can't. Oh, it worked. It's actually worked. I've actually done it. I got to the bottom of the well of grief. I did the thing. That's it. That's the shadow. I've now turned the light onto the shadow and realized it's an illusion. That too is an illusion. The sorrow, the emotional pain, or most of it, can only exist if it has an ego that it can attack. In many ways, I recognized that the ego itself is the pain. The identity itself is the pain. The person is the pain, because the ego is constructed out of desire and fear of pain and the desire to be free of pain. Now, if we stop dealing with the symptoms and get to the root cause, we find by eradicating the ego, the pain goes as well. And what that does leave is not that numbness, it's not void, it leaves raw experience, raw, immediate, present experience in its fullness, in its totality, in its aliveness. Now, this resulted in a state of total bliss. I was in the state of absolute nirvana because I was finally rid of decades of pain that had been laid down since very early on. And I experienced a very common pattern that happens to a lot of people on the path of getting it and then losing it. And a lot of people fall into despair when they feel like they got it. I got it. I found it. I found the land of bliss. And then at some point, you find yourself lost again, and you go, "Hang on a minute. How did I get back here? How am I suffering again?" And you can't even trace back, when did this start? Like, you could have been going months, maybe even years in an enlightened, awakened state, and then all of a sudden you're like, "Hang on, my ego's come back for round two. Like, what's happened here?" And that's the problem that I'd like to address right here. Is often it's the emotional pain that rises up, that drags us back into that ego identified state. So to experience the bliss and then experience the pain again, there's simply a misunderstanding. A misconception happens, and it's a very difficult one to break because it's a lifelong habit getting to this point. And so it's a very difficult habit to start breaking away from, because it feels so natural to want to avoid pain or want to accept pain. And yet that is what must be done. Never forget the intensity of what we're trying to achieve here. We are not literally, we are trying to jump over the moon here, okay? And so to accept pain is impossible for the ego. The identity cannot accept pain. The mind cannot fully accept pain. As long as the ego is there, there's going to be some remnant of shadow. There has to be, because that's why it exists in the first place. If the ego resolved the pain, it would disappear. So never forget the intensity of what we are trying to really liberate and fully break free from this cycle of getting it, losing it, the cycle of birth and death, essentially, samsara. So this emotional pain, this emotional pain that sneaks in by the back door and drags you back into personhood. A lot of the time people have these massive experiences when they have a glimpse of understanding and awakening from whatever practice, whatever discipline. Sometimes drugs, I don't recommend mushrooms or psychedelics, absolutely not, but for some people it seems to work. So what through whatever means people have that experience, but haven't quite had the full understanding that will lead to total and full liberation. So I'd like to just give a couple of practices that helped me massively, that helped me enormously. Firstly, you have to understand that it's the pain isn't going to go. What we're trying to do is liberate ourselves from suffering. We're not trying to eradicate the pain itself. Pain itself is not a problem. It's already here. It's already there. It's just doing what it does, like everything does what it does. The sun rises and falls, the moon sails across the sky, the birds are flying, the trees are growing, the waves, the tides rise and fall. Everybody goes about their business. Your emotional pain comes and goes. It's all a natural unfolding. What causes the suffering is our resistance to the pain. That is crucial to understand. So, when we feel that massive surge of bliss and peace and the pain goes, we become a little bit complacent and think the pain's never going to come back. If we go into this understanding, okay, I'm liberated, understanding it's the body mind is still here and the pain will be returning at some point. When it does, there's approaches for it when it does return, and it's not a problem. That's the understanding. There is the Vedantic approach and the Tantric approach. So when I feel this pain returning, the Vedantic approach is something that can be done in order to to pull the attention back into the infinite universal consciousness, to eradicate the ego, to drop all of the narratives, to drop all of the stories in the mind, to cease this identification with the individual, temporary, finite, separate self, and instead identify as the infinite, universal consciousness that has never once suffered. And this approach, the Vedantic approach, is about dropping away. It's about disengaging from the narrative in the mind and the pain that rises. So the Vedantic approach to negative emotional pain is to watch the pain. It can come in. So let's say, let's take an example. Your emotional pain is rising in the form of resentment, and that's packaged up with anger and frustration, and it's just a nasty feeling. It's tight. You can feel it in the body, you can feel it in the mind. It's lots of images and feelings. In the Vedantic approach, you simply watch, you don't get involved, you don't identify, you disengage from it. And we can even take the neti approach of saying, I am not this, I am not this, I am not this pain, and simply allow that pain to come into the field of consciousness and then disappear and just fall away over the horizon. And it takes a little bit of patience and discipline to simply remain as consciousness. And this is an enormous relief. The upside of the Vedantic approach is that it just feels fantastic. You're right there. It's such a relief because previously, like when I'm feeling pain that bad, I'd have to find a way to soothe the pain. before I knew about these approaches, I'd have to find a way to alleviate that pain. And that I'd have to do something. So in the early days, that was like turning to very unhealthy coping mechanisms, such as alcohol and other, unwholesome things. Later on, the mechanisms got a lot healthier, like exercise and even meditation, in a funny kind of way. So a lot of healthier methods of coping with the pain, but I was still trying to, in a way, still trying to medicate and anesthetize the pain. Now, anesthetizing the pain, or the attempt to, strengthens the ego and the separate self. In true meditation, in true spirituality, we're trying to drop the ego away. We're trying to get rid of the sense of being an individual, temporary, finite self. And by taking that Vedantic approach, you can continually reaffirm your true nature as infinite universal consciousness that isn't suffering. It's aware of the pain, but it's not suffering. Whew! What a massive relief. The upside is this feels fantastic. It often leads to feelings of total bliss, total peace. And you can do this for any emotion that rises. Any emotion that rises, from the depth of grief to anxiety to stress to resentment, guilt, shame, all of that pain. Now, that has a deep and profound impact in that by not engaging, you're no longer creating stories and narratives around the pain, and it simply becomes a raw experience. It's just an experience like any other. And because there's no longer a narrative around the pain eventually stops coming back. The pain can only come back if it has your attention. If you ignore it for long enough, like a hungry dog, if you simply ignore it, it will go away eventually. Eventually. If you feed a hungry dog, it's just going to keep coming back because it will never be full. Never. It will simply keep coming back. So by disengaging, the narrative begins to fall away. And without a narrative and an ego propping up the pain, eventually it will diminish and then fall away. Now, there are some downsides to the Vedantic approach, and fair is fair. I'll talk about the downsides. The downside is there's a couple. The downside, or one of them, is that we can fall into the trap of doing this thing known as spiritual bypassing, in which we are simply trying to ignore a problem that could be fixed if we paid some attention to it. And I mean, it's kind of, I found, because I've done this, I fell into this trap and I've done it many times, like an idiot. I've done it many times in that I've simply tried to use the Vedantic approach to avoid avoid having to do my work in real life. And it's a common trap, because that goes for internally as well. And trying to get to a state where I don't have to deal with certain things. Now, it doesn't quite work like that, because as much as we'd like it to, as much as I'd like it to, it doesn't fully heal the problem. Like, I believe that if we want to heal, we have to feel. And for a long time, I was in the Vedantic path, but I needed it. I needed to get away from the suffering and the pain in order to have some clarity, in order to think clearly, in order to become happier and able to function in the world. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about spiritual bypassing specifically, so I'll speak more to spiritual bypassing in that episode. The second downside is that it's quite hard to come back sometimes. I've got to say, I've left the earth many times, and resided and abided in a state in which there is no earth, there is no Corin Bryant, there is no physical form, there is no anything. And I've been able to reside in that for days. I lose count, very, very long periods of time. And I wonder sometimes, if one day I simply stopped uploading anything at all and I completely disappeared from all platforms online and the physical world as well, please don't worry about me, because it means that I achieved rainbow body and disappeared into the land of bliss. It's hard to bring yourself back sometimes. And I mean, I would say that can be a downside, because the world needs you. It does. People need you. Your family needs you. Your friend, even if they do your head in sometimes, your kids need you. I know they do your head in sometimes. Your work needs you, and that really does your head in sometimes. But the world does need you engaged. And if you if you vanish into the world of nirvana, well, that's that. Um, there's one more downside in that, as Alan Watts puts it, the great Alan Watts, that if you're going to leave town, it's important not to tell anyone, because every debt collector, everyone that you've ever owed money to or owed a favor to, suddenly comes rushing to your door, and it's very true, very true. Uh, when you're able to start disengaging from thoughts, your mind is going to try every trick under the sun to get some attention back off you. I sometimes see meditation as if you're sat in a circle, and the purpose of the meditation is to stay sat in the circle. That's it. That's all you have to do, is remain in the circle. But there is a little devil that is going to try and convince you to leave. Now, the devil cannot make you leave. He can't physically push you, he can't physically harm you or anyone you care about in any way. All he can do is talk to you. And in the early days, he's going to say, he's just going to try very basic. He's just going to say, well, just leave the circle, just get up and walk out of the circle. And you'll say, no. Then he might go, I'm gonna throw this rock at you if you don't leave the circle. But you know that the rules of the game is he's not allowed to physically harm you. So you say no. Then he gets a £1,000,000 out of his pocket and says, hey, if you leave the circle, I'll give you this £1,000,000. And you go, no. And then he's going to get some beautiful men or women along and go, hey, leave the circle, and hey, these all want a party. And it's going to start getting harder and harder, because it'll escalate. And this is what happens with the mind. The mind will just be prepared for that. That's my solution to that, is just understand that's probably coming. But understand that all thoughts are just thoughts. All feelings are just feelings. No matter what it throws at you, remain as infinite universal consciousness. The sky doesn't care what clouds are in it. The sky can accept and allow everything. If it's small, light, fluffy clouds passing by quickly, or large, dark storm clouds passing by slowly, from the perspective of the sky, it simply doesn't matter. So that's the Vedantic approach. Now, as I mentioned, it doesn't necessarily get to the root cause of some of the things that might be going on a deeper level. And eventually, in the Vedantic approach and in meditation, you might be experiencing these long periods of bliss, ignoring the pain that keeps rising up. But eventually, you get a bit fed up. I had this. Like, okay, I can ignore all these feelings, but I'm getting a bit fed up of them continually rising. And why aren't they going? Shouldn't they be going? Like, isn't that, don't they go at some point? You get a bit fed up with having to ignore them. So, is there a solution to that? Or do we just stay in the Vedantic approach and just practice discipline and patience until eventually they stop coming? Well, it's kind of up to you. You have to practice a little bit of discernment and really feel into it. Feel into what works for you. What does your intuition tell you? Are these things going to go away eventually? Or are these things pointing to a deeper issue? Personally, I believe one of the best ways to tell if something is arising from a deeper issue that could do with a bit more attention is when you really feel it in your body. If you have something that's unpleasant and painful that only rises in your mind as images, thoughts, words, it might be a problem, but it will pass quite quickly. But when you feel it both in the mind and in the body, like right in the gut, or you feel it as pain or heaviness in the chest or the stomach or the neck or the back, and it manifests in a physical way, for me, that's usually a sign that something needs a little bit of attention. And that's when I put my rubber gloves on and go grab my scrubbing brush, and we go down deep into the depth and see if we can't give something a bit of a deep clean. And that's when we come to something called the tantric approach. Now, the word tantric has a lot of connotations these days for good reason. But we're not going there today, because tantric essentially refers to uh, raw experiencing. It's the path of towards, going towards feelings and really feeling the path of allowing in life and experience. So in the tantric approach, and this is enormously powerful, and this can bring about massive liberation, especially if you've been on a Vedantic approach for a long time. If you've been on the approach of disengaging for a long time, but you've become a bit dissatisfied with it, and the pain just won't seem to leave you alone, just switch tactic for a bit. After all, we have an infinite amount of time to deal with all of this, because time doesn't exist. So it's like a computer game where you've got infinite lives. Just keep trying, you can just keep going until it's done. We've got all the time in the universe. So if something's not working and you've tried it for a very long time and your intuition tells you that ain't working, switch gear, go back in a different direction. And the tantric approach is very useful if you've been on the path of disengaging from thought and feeling for a long time, because now we turn back around and now we face that feeling fully without the story, which we've hopefully by this point managed to eradicate. There's no more ego, there's no more narrative, there's no more identity. You are established as infinite universal consciousness. Now, from that point, from that perspective, you can revisit those initial painful experiences, but no longer as an individual person, as the infinite universal consciousness. So the sorrow, the depth of anxiety, existential horror, terror, all of those nasty feelings that I tried to bury, that I tried to ignore, that I tried to numb myself from, that I tried to run away from, and then even in the meditative approach tried to completely disengage from. Now I could turn back towards them, go towards them, let them in, and allow myself to experience it fully. Because in the present moment, in the present moment, with no future, no past, no narratives, no implication, the actual feeling itself is not a problem. It's not suffering. And I returned to that wonderful state when I was before the booze, before all of that, before all of the nonsense, when I was on that moped, riding past the reservoir, listening to REM, Everybody Hurts. I was right back there. And I mean that literally. Because there is no past. It's still happening now. It's still happening now. There is no past. It's the feeling is still there. And now it's a returning to that feeling once again without the burden of trying to get rid of it, which is why I could enjoy sorrow when I was young, and why eventually later on it almost killed me because I stopped accepting it. But then by revisiting that acceptance, the sorrow, the depression, the anxiety simply became melancholy again. And I could fall back in love with that feeling. Now, I'm making quite light of it there, and I don't. I want to sympathize and empathize because I know that people suffer horribly with very deep psychological pain, very deep. And I will give you a fair warning here. The tantric approach is no joke. It is no picnic. It is no walk in the park because you have to go back and revisit a lot of painful feelings that you haven't experienced perhaps for quite some time. But have some courage because now you have recognized and realized that you are infinite universal consciousness, and that can bear anything. The ego, the individual, the person can't. The ego is fragile, very fragile. It's terrified. The inner child is terrified. The inner adult is terrified. The individual is terrified. It's had enough. It's exhausted, stressed, depressed, anxious, grieving, all of it. All of it. But the infinite universal consciousness has not suffered a single second. Not once. So have some courage if you're going to dive in and do this tantric approach. But it's a very powerful thing you can do for your shadow work. That's going to be an episode for later on, shadow work. Because now the upside to this is that you're actually healing now. It can be very painful. I'm just giving you fair warning. I'm not trying to put you off. I'm just giving you fair warning. You're going to uncover the shadow, and it can be very, very painful. But the upside to this is that you're cutting out the tumor. You're cutting out and healing the thing that's causing the pain. You're taking out the bins. So you're not just dealing with the symptoms, you're not just cleaning the surfaces, you're actually doing a deep clean now. And there's an enormous relief to this, I've got to say. It's very liberating to finally face that which has been chasing you all this time, because this really is it. You know on a very deep level that beyond this point, that's it. There can't be anything deeper than that. This is why I say don't accept things too soon. Don't just say, oh, well, that's just the way it is. No. If you have the courage to truly go to the very thing that you really, really don't want to face. Insta killness invenitur. It's a Latin phrase that means you will find it in the filth. And I really mean that. The shadow is the place where the real nasties are. The real creepy crawlies. It's because we have layers to our pain, and in the early days of looking at our layers, we deal with the layers we want to deal with, and often you have, like, in people's narratives, it's like, oh, I my problem is I help people too much. I'm too compassionate. I'm too loving. That's my problem. We have like these problems that are quite palatable to us, and so they're the ones we try and deal with. But when you get to the shadow, it's going to the stuff you really didn't want to look at. I mean, it's the time when in primary school you wet yourself in front of everyone and you carried this and everyone laughed, including the teacher, right? Like, and this hot shame that rose up in your chest that you then swallowed and buried deep down, and tried to forget about and then did forget about, that's going to come up. And it's that sort of stuff. And I mean, deeper and darker than that, it's like it's the time you did something awful, the thing that you did that you really shouldn't have done. I mean, so just to give examples, I like to go from my experience. Not that this is a therapy session for me, but just from my experiences here. One of the ones when I was young, like probably year 4 or 5 in primary school, I was out playing with my friends, and we decided to play chicken and just run across the road and see who could run across the road and nearly get hit by a car. Like, and I nearly got hit, like to the point where it was really close. And that if that had hit me, that would have probably killed me, or I'd have been crippled for life. And that was one when I got into the tantric approach. That was one of the traumatic memories that rose up in me, because I got the bollocking of a lifetime for that from the driver. Let me tell you. But see, I can laugh about it now. I probably shouldn't, but I can laugh about it now. But when I did the tantric approach and went deep into my sense of embarrassment, shame, guilt, fear, trauma, when I went into that, that's one of the memories that rose up. I'm just giving you fair warning. But previously, I hadn't been aware that that was there. And when we have these buried and repressed feelings stored in the body, it comes up in all kinds of very, very damaging ways in our life. It results in fear. It results in anxiety. So yeah, that's the point. When you finally allow these feelings to rise up, give them the space, give them the time and space that they need in order. That's all they want. That's all they want. That's all it is. They just need space to breathe. Just burp it out. You know, it's in the filth. You know, it's burp it out. Get rid of it. You know, just throw it up. It can be very unpleasant, but it's better out than in. Okay, so let's get down and clear the greasy trays. Let's get rid. And there is a liberation to this, because this is it. This is it. This was the thing. This was the shadow doing push-ups in the car park, you know? Like, now we're facing it. This is the big one. And there's a liberation to that. There's also a liberation to not being afraid of the pain anymore. The more you do this, the more you're not so bothered about the pain. Who cares, you know? Every time something rises up, you turn immediately towards it and go, okay, what is it? What's this one? And in a bizarre way, a roundabout, strange kind of way, you're glad when these deeper feelings arise, because you go, oh, good, here's another opportunity. Here's another opportunity to get through another deep chunk, another deep layer. So when these things arise, you turn towards it with a sense of love and compassion and almost enthusiasm. You go, oh, great, there's another repressed traumatic memory that I can face. That's going to be really healing. When I face that repressed traumatic memory, I'm going to be so healed, and the rest of my life's going to be lighter as a result of it. How great is that? And the intuition I'm going to get from that's going to be crazy. It's just, everything just becomes a joy. Even the deepest, darkest memories, eventually they lose their pain. Eventually. It's like chewing gum. You chew, eventually the flavor goes. You know, it's a bit like that. Even the worst, most traumatic memories. And again, I don't want to make light of it, because I know you're suffering, and some people will be suffering from traumatic memories that will feel insurmountable. But have courage. Go towards as infinite universal consciousness, and let's get it cleared away. It doesn't dismiss the pain. It doesn't forgive anyone. You don't need to forgive anyone. You don't need to fix anything on the surface level. Let's get the pain out of your body. Get the pain out of your body. So the downside there is, yeah, it can be painful, but the upside is you're going to do the deep clean that you so desperately needed to do. So, what's my recommendation on emotional pain and how to navigate this in the post awakening world? Well, both paths, the Vedantic and Tantric approaches, work, and it'll take some intuition about which one you kind of need at which particular time. My advice is just do both of them because you have an infinite number of lifetimes to do them. So, so just try either one. Um, I would say, in the vast majority of cases, both paths at one point or another are necessary. I think it's very rare that people just do one or the other. Because if you were to do just the tantric approach, the downside is you might get lost in your experience and you'll get lost in the narrative. So you need a touch of the Vedantic approach to drop the narrative away, to drop the ego away. So I would say, just from me, this would be my personal intuition, is that both paths are not only a good idea, but actually you're going to have to do both. They're both really the same thing ultimately, but most people, I would say, should really do both. And eventually, what out the other side of this process, you just have a feeling of what am I running from exactly? What's the problem really? Within this present moment, even the worst experiences psychologically are just a feeling, just a thought, just an image, just a feeling that will pass. That's all. That's all it is. It's just a sensation like any other. And in the liberated state, it almost becomes irrelevant. I know that's a crazy thing to say, but it does. It almost becomes irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It's just a sensation like any other. Even though that was the thing that you started this whole path to get rid of, eventually, it's not actually all that important. You just want to get on and live your life. And as the joy and love, peace and liberation arises, you just you just begin to abide as peace. And the emotional pain rising is just the same as if you woke up and stubbed your toe on the door and you go, ouch. Well, that's a shame. Never mind. And then emotional pain rises. Oh, ouch. Because it's all the same thing. It's just a constant experience unfolding up, down. Oh, there's happiness. Oh, good. Oh, there's sadness. Oh, no. Oh, I'm in despair. Oh, no, I'm feeling hope. Oh, no, I'm on an upswing. Oh, no, I'm on a downswing. And everything just reveals itself to be the marvelous play that it has always been. You just got lost in the experience for too long and you started to take your role a bit too seriously. Let's not forget, liberation is not the eradication of pain, but the acceptance of it. Not as the individual, because the individual cannot accept pain, but as the universal consciousness accepting whatever happens forever. Yeah, as we said in the earliest quote there, do not mistake the absence of pain for health, because pain has a purpose as well. If you're in a relationship that's causing you a lot of pain, maybe it's time to look at the relationship. Can it be worked or healed or whatever? And there is a purpose to pain. So if you have a pain in the body, you get it seen to. If you have emotional pain, it needs some attention. So it's worth remembering that there is a purpose to it, and there's a unity to pain as well. I don't know you. I don't know what you've experienced. I don't know what your life circumstances are, but I know this. You will have felt pain, just as I have felt. You will have felt depression. You will have felt anxiety. You will feel sorrow and grief. You will feel loss. You will feel loneliness. You will feel alienation. You will feel longing. You will feel dread. You will feel fear. If you haven't felt those things so far, you will at some point in the future. Just as I do, just as you do. And we share this. We share this, all of us. All 8 billion of us now. We've all had this pain. Doesn't that mean something? Can't we look at each other and say, hey, I know you've been through it, all right? I know you've been through it. I know you're going through the ringer. And we can all say, it sucks. It sucks, doesn't it? We share this. We are unified in our pain. It is a sense of love. I know you've suffered. I know. I don't know you personally, but I know that you have suffered terribly. I know you have. And you don't deserve it. You don't. Because you inherited this pain. I don't know if you know that, but it's not your fault. It's not your fault you're going through this. It's not your fault that you've been through this. You're carrying this pain for somebody else. It came to you. And you think the number of people that have walked this earth and felt terrible, terrible pain and never dealt with it, and now it's arrived at your door. At your door. And it's not your fault. At some point in the future, there won't be any more pain. And everything I've said here today is a little bit bittersweet, because this is all a coping strategy for something that shouldn't be happening. There shouldn't be this emotional pain. There shouldn't be the amount of betrayal, treachery, invalidation, physical violence, abuse, manipulation, sneakiness, two-facedness, nastiness, nepotism, jealousy. These things should not exist. They only exist because this world is suffering from a delusion of the ego, a cult, a belief that we are all walking around as individual, temporary, finite, separate selves, clawing at each other, trying to get one up over on each other, trying to gain an advantage over the rest of the world, trying desperately to avoid our own suffering, and trying, in turn, to inflict suffering on others. And this shouldn't happen. It's tragic. It's nothing less than tragic. There is a world in the future in which this doesn't happen. And by doing what you're doing, going through the spiritual path right now, you are going a long way to relieving the world of this burden of pain. So keep going. You're doing a great job. Keep at the path. It is not selfish to heal. Healing your pain will help the earth. It will help your brothers and sisters around you, and ultimately will heal the universe. I'll leave you with a poem. This is called Not So Far as the Forest by Edna St. Vincent Millay. That chill is in the air, which the wise know well, and have even learned to bear. This joy, I know, will soon be under snow. The sun sets in a cloud, and is not seen. Beauty that spoke aloud addresses now only the remembering ear. The heart begins here to feed on what has been. Night falls fast. Today is in the past. Blown from the dark hill hither to my door. 3 flakes, then 4. Arrive, then many more.